Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dauphin.
I wanted to take just a minute on this podcast episode to tell you a little bit about the online course that we are offering now, the Bit Course 2.0, Understanding How and Why Bits Function. You can find it at the website, thebitcourse.com, which will be linked in the show notes. This is a very comprehensive course. We've got two different versions. There's a masterclass version where weekly we have live calls and go over the modules and the study guide. That course has been running 25 to 30 hours over the course of 7 weeks. If you take that version, you're also eligible to go through our BIT certification program and take that test. It's at no additional cost if you want to add consulting about bits to your repertoire of body work or whatever else you might be doing. We also will have an evergreen version that you can take anytime you work at your own pace. It is less expensive. It's also a lot less content. You don't have the weekly Zoom calls with me. Those are going about 2 to 2.5 hours each week. So the masterclass course winds up 25, 30 hours long. The evergreen course you're going to do in 12 to 15, something like that. So check it out. You can go to thebitcourse.com, sign up for the free newsletter. You'll get a 30-minute video on the foamy mouth and all of the implications of that, as well as 5 or 6 articles that I've written regarding bits. Get a feel for the content. This will absolutely be some of the best money and time you have ever spent on your horsemanship journey, I assure you. And it is not discipline specific. We cover just about every aspect of the horse world that you can think of. Our guest today is Mr. Carl Bledsoe. Carl was named the 2022 Humane Horseman of the Year. He is a trainer, clinician, and educator seeking to teach people better ways to get gaiting without the unfortunate methods we've seen and heard about. He uses classical principles for physical and mental developing horses. And in other words, he's getting riders out of the mouths of gaited horses and advocating for animal welfare by getting riders out of the horse's way. Rather than shortcuts, gimmicks, and subjugation, he believes in classical training with a true understanding of the biomechanics of the horse as well as the rider, and is advocating for purity of gait for the long-term health of the horse, both physically and mentally. He believes it all starts with the question, what's in it for the horse? Carl, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Doing very well. I've been anxious to chat with you on this podcast for quite a while. I'm glad we got it all scheduled and made it happen here. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Well, I'm always excited when I get to share what I do. I've gone through a pretty big transformation in the last 12 to 15 years in the horse industry, and the more you know, the better you can be. And I've been on an educational journey for the last 10 years with the gaited breeds. And it's just been a phenomenal thing in my life, what I've discovered and what I'm able to share with folks. So I'm always excited to be able to talk about horses and what I like to do and what I like to see.
Well, cool. Well, looking forward to getting into that, talking about all of it. I know you have a pretty interesting life as well as a practical message, so that just adds to the flavor of the whole deal. So, well, we're going to go for the lightning round questions, kind of icebreakers, get everybody relaxed and kind of bring your personality out a little bit. These are for points and prizes, so you want to be on your A game here, all right?
Okay.
Start out with an easy one. What is your favorite way to relax?
Oh my goodness. My wife and I like to go to the local diner and do a personal date with one another and get away from the horses and the farm and the telephone and just get lost in conversation, whether it's about a book or a place we traveled to last week or just small talk. We completely absorb ourselves in each other as much as we possibly can when we're not on the road.
That's wonderful. Very nice. Morning or evening?
Oh, that's a pretty good mix. We do a breakfast probably when we're not on the road, probably 80% of the time. But as far as the date, when we purposely do that, it's a pretty good mix, 50-50, morning or evening.
Okay. Well, I meant more, are you a morning person or an evening person? Which time of day do you prefer and are at your best?
Oh, evening by far.
Okay. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
You have a particular breed that you like?
Uh, we have Aussies. I've always had Aussies my entire life. But that being said, we do have a little Maltipoo that lives here at the house that has my heart. Even though I refer to her as a drop kick dog, she does have a special place in my heart.
Okay. Do you think it's fair to say that hot dog water is the opposite of holy water?
Oh,
And can you
absolutely.
can you add a few drops of it in it to ruin any other kind of water?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't imagine hot dog water being good in anything. Um, except maybe occasionally. No, we wouldn't make popsicles out of it. That's just I said that to make my wife laugh.
Um, so people would all swim in the ocean, which, as we all know, has many corpses in it, but nobody would swim in a swimming pool that has a dead body in it, meaning that all people have a particular corpse to water ratio that they're okay with. Do you have a particular corpse to water ratio that you'd be fine with? How big of a body of water would it have to be, you think?
Um, probably at least a 10-acre lake. As long as the corpse was at the other end, I'd be okay.
That sounds good. If you can't smell it, that's fair enough, right?
There you go. As long as I can't smell it, I don't know about it.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Sometimes, absolutely.
Okay.
Not all the time, but occasionally I do. But I'm a big pineapple lover, so absolutely sometimes the cheese pineapple combination can be a good thing.
Do you like thick or thin crust?
Thick,
Are you a cook?
no.
Okay. If you could choose any superpower, what superpower would you choose?
Oh man, superpower. Um, maybe be able to read minds.
Okay. That might be scarier than you think if you really had
Probably,
that
probably is so
ability.
because I'm really good at reading expression right now. So a lot of time the expression kind of tells what's going on in the mind, but not to the degree that it's going on in the mind. So if I could read minds along with the ability to read expression, I feel like I could be more accomplished in what I do.
Mhm. Are you decisive or indecisive?
Now that depends on the situation. Probably 85% of the time, very decisive. My OCD really works overtime. But then there's a spontaneous side to me sometimes that comes out after you get to know me. So I would say decisive 85% of the time.
You're the first person that has given me a percentage like that, which I think makes you maybe super decisive.
Yeah.
There may be a level to this I haven't considered before. So,
uh,
bay or sorrel?
Bay.
Man, you wouldn't believe how strong it is for bay horses. Like
Oh man,
everybody
there's
likes bay
nothing like
horses.
when you go to the car lot and you buy a two-tone car, they're always worth more money.
I, when I started asking these questions and I threw this one in there, I figured it'd be a 50-50 mix, but it's not even close to a 50-50
The
mix.
funny thing is, I have more sorrel and chestnuts than I do bays.
Mhm. And I hear that a lot too. People like my best horse is the sorrel, and I really like the sorrels, but they like looking at the bays, you know.
I do.
Um, do you have a particular happy place, like a specific location or something where you just go and you're at home there?
Um, I have one end of the couch where everything that I do is stacked around me. I like to read quite a bit and research quite a bit. And when I sit on that end of the couch in the house here, everybody pretty much kind of just moves around me and realizes I'm doing my thing. So I would say there.
Okay. You have a little Sheldon Cooper in you, it sounds like there. Have you ever watched that TV show?
A time or two, but not a lot. My sense of humor is sometimes is really slow, depending on the circumstances. So I watching stuff like that, sometimes I don't get the humor till after the fact. And in some cases, Tammy will have to kick me under the table if somebody says something funny when we're out with people, just so I laugh when I'm supposed to.
Thoughts or feelings?
Ooh, man, that's a 50-50. Because I'm a deep thinker, but I'm a feeling person too. And if you had a conversation with my wife, she would probably say feeling, but I would say 50-50 thoughts, feeling.
Okay. Again, the percentage. So there's your decisiveness, even though on a balance. So that might be a good place to be too. There's certainly pros and cons to both, but if you go too far in either direction, I think you're in a bad spot. So that 50-50 balance is probably a gift that
I
you've
have
got
had to
going on there.
learn. I have had to learn the older I get to understand that the shades of gray sometimes are a better color than completely black or completely white. I lived in a black and white world for a long time.
Would you tell us something unexpected about you?
I'm bald headed. Most people see me with a hat on and don't recognize me without a hat, and I'm pretty bald on top. A lot of people, you should see the expression on their face if I take my cap or my cowboy hat off. Oh, you're bald headed. So that's pretty unexpected.
Okay. Do you have a favorite book or movie?
Lonesome Dove,
The book or the movie?
both.
I would say that's about the best book I've ever read. It really, and the movie is great, but the book just, it has, things in it that the movie does or the miniseries doesn't contain, but truly a
And
masterpiece.
so many different angles that you can look at it. If you read it and you just follow it from one character's perspective, all of the life that was lived in that book that is still applicable, if you would, in the world that we live in. You just pick one character and follow that character from start to finish, and just how they applied everyday life to the story. It was just remarkable the way that thing was laid out.
Do you have a biggest fear or any kind of phobia, spiders or something like that? Anything along those lines?
Um, Snakes, big time
Okay.
snakes.
And
I
you're
mean,
in Georgia, so you
I mean, I
in
mean,
the
run.
southeast we have
I
them all.
mean, run like a girl scared of snakes.
My best friend, he's the kind of guy, if I needed to hide a body in the middle of the night, I could call him and no question to ask. But
Yep.
spiders, he is absolutely like that. If he
The
comes across a spider nest, he's gone. Yep. So
spiders don't bother me, and snakes didn't always bother me. I'm the youngest of three children, and I have an older brother that is almost 7 years older than me. And when we were young, every step he took, I was right behind him, and he was cruel. He would like pick up a snake and say, "Here, Carl, catch and throw it at me." And I've been bit a couple of times, so that's where that phobia comes from.
okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, we've probably met a horse or two suffering a similar dilemma, huh? So,
Yep.
what skill or technique do you currently not have horseback that you admire in someone else and would like to work on or improve in? Is there anything like that for you?
I am fascinated with the vaquero style of riding and that journey and the artistry to that. And I have started that journey, but the farther you get into that journey, the more discovery you do about yourself. And I am just absolutely engrossed in all that I can study about that.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how well can you back a trailer?
10.
We should really have some competitions like that. I've thought about that behind the horse show and all. Like you
I
could
can
have
back
some.
I can back one so good that when people come to my house, because uh, our farm is laid out really differently, and they have to pull in my driveway because my arena is a quarter of a mile from the barn, and the arena is over in the woods. So we have to unload at the house and pony the horses over to the arena when people come for lessons. And I have to back the people out of my driveway. And on one side, there's a huge rock. I mean, a huge rock as big as my truck. And on the other side's a ditch that drops off about 3 feet. And I've had to back all kinds of trucks and trailers out that driveway and around the curve. And I have had people say, if you do a trailer backing clinic, we will bring everybody we know so you can teach them how to back this truck and trailer.
I love that. I really do. Do you have a particular proudest horse moment?
Um, it was when I was awarded the 2022 Humane Horseman of the Year award was the most emotional moment that I had ever won. And it was because of the journey that I had been on prior to receiving that award, because I went from one extreme training horses to a completely another extreme in my belief system, in my application and everything. So that would be the one thing that I would say.
Um, okay, I've got some new questions here, so I'm sort of figuring this out as I'm going along, which ones I'm going to ask you and which ones not. Are you a do-it-yourselfer or a sub it out to someone else kind of guy?
Pretty much do it myself or within reason. I'm not a mechanic. If I have to have mechanic work done, I have to have that done. But outside of that, do it myself. Or if we have to build something or figure something out, I do that.
What is your least favorite barn chore?
Cleaning the water troughs.
That's a fair one. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't again, I think the southeast, like our water troughs probably get a little nastier than other places in the world because
And they
we've
have to
got
be
other
done
stuff.
more. They have to be done more frequently because the humidity and that they turn green overnight. So that's one of those things. This time of year, it is just absolutely relentless to keep those things clean.
I recently lost some absolute slabs of goldfish that have been in a water trough several years. I don't know how they were almost as big as your hand, like a
Yep.
small brim sized goldfish, and they finally met their end. But do you have a favorite barn chore?
I love to clean. I like a tidy barn and I like it very organized. So the barn cleaning process, whether it's stalls or raking up the shed row or just organizing, I like a clean, tidy barn.
And last question, what is the best smell in the barn?
Oh, the horse smell, man. Just I couldn't imagine a day of my life without touching, feeling, smelling the horse. And it doesn't matter if it's the horse himself or the stalls or whatever. Just the horse smell.
Well, let me tabulate your score real quick here, Carl. And I've got you at 3,622 points, which makes you our high scorer of all time on this particular game. And that entitles you to either a genuine compliment or an awkward silence, your choice.
Uh, Give me a genuine compliment. I do the awkward silence pretty regular.
Well, I will say I haven't had a ton of interactions with you. We had a really nice phone call and so forth, but I've watched your stuff and this has been emphasized to me even more going through these questions. You strike me as a person who is incredibly honest and including in your self-reflections. There's not really semblance of an ego or a bending things around to make yourself sound better or different or whatever. You're just straight down the middle, black and white. This is what it is. I am like this. You're perfectly good with that. I would say that's an incredibly rare trait and one that I greatly appreciate in you. And I think as we go through your story here, that aspect of you will be revealed more and more and more. So kudos to you on your self honesty there.
That is the very reason that I'm still out here on the road, able to do these clinics and have been given this life that we are at this point in my life. Just unapologetically being me and just telling the truth.
Well, I like it. More people should be that way. It's pretty regular that you have to question whether you met a person or you met the person's persona, you know? So
Absolutely.
Well, why don't we get into your journey here and kind of start at the beginning? So you began in the gaited horse show world. Is that fair to say? And
I grew up in the Big Lick, Tennessee walking horse world. My father trained Big Lick, Tennessee walking horses. He had an uncle when he was growing up that liked gaited horses, but they didn't show. So my dad hung out at a local stables there when he was a young man, and then as luck would have it, he developed a love for the Tennessee walking horse, and he and my mom were married a short while, and he got offered a job in Alabama prior to me even being born, and he was on that journey in his life training Big Lick Tennessee walking horses. And I grew up in that world. It's the only world I've ever known outside of what I'm doing now.
okay. Um, I'm a little torn on where to direct this. I generally like to spend a little time defining some terms just so in later in the conversation all of the listeners and you and I will be on the same page. And so I think I'm going to go there and then we'll come back to your story a little bit more.
Okay.
So would you tell us what is a gaited horse? What about them makes them different, and what specifically do we mean when we say gaited and so forth?
So a gaited horse is a horse that does kind of an ambling gait, if you would. When they transition from a walk to the next speed, they don't move into diagonal pairs and trot like all the other breeds do. They have a semblance of the same footfall as they do in the walk. They just add carriage and speed to it. So the 1, 2, 3, 4 beat that you ride at the walk is pretty much the same 1, 2, 3, 4 beat you ride with a gaited horse. It's very smooth to ride, but it's very, very, very easy to interrupt and default the horse to a pace, which is not desirable.
Okay, so what would a pace be?
Lateral pairs, both legs on the same side of the body. So when you ride a quarter horse, you work really hard to pair the diagonals, the one rear leg and one front leg moving in unison together to balance the horse. On a gaited horse, when they default to the pace, they have lateral pairs, like the right leg, rear and front on the same side of the body would work in unison, which the horse travels in a hollow posture when he paces. And I'm sure coming from the world you come from, you've heard judges refer to a horse pace walking that's not correct. And it's the same thing with a gaited horse. We do that same walk pretty much at speed.
So, but there are a multitude of different gaits. Is that correct? I know at least five. So what sort of differentiates this one from that one and so forth?
Well, breed associations, you know, you've got the Tennessee walking horse, the racking horse, and the spotted saddle horse, which are all pretty much very, very, very related in their breed registries. Then you've got the mountain horse, and there's two or three different mountain horse registries. And then you move into some of the Spanish breeds, which, you know, the Pasos or the Peruvians or the Manga Larga Marchador. So they've all of those different breeds have had some kind of outcross, but they all have the same genetic code. The migration of the T3 gene is what enables all of these horses to be gaited, and they all share that genetic code, even though there's been some outcrosses that's gotten some of the different breeds, mainly the Spanish breeds. Most of the American gaited horses, if you would, are closer related, even though they've got a breed registry that's recognized by the Department of Agriculture. They still are really, really kin, more so than you could imagine.
So from a trainer's perspective, is getting let's say, would you ever see a trainer that is going to ride Pasafinas, Foxtrotters, Saddlebreds, and Tennessee Walkers and get all of those horses to doing their unique things and so forth? Or does it tend to be a much more specialized sort of world? So in other words, even though they would all be considered gated, there still are reasonable divisions within there, or is that completely
Well,
false?
there's reasonable divisions. You wouldn't be if you trained the Spanish bred horses, you would not necessarily be very good with the Tennessee walking horse. Um, that being said, balance is balance. So with what I do, I run into all those breeds because what I travel and do is teach balance on these different breeds. So I've had to train myself to recognize all of the different breeds, what their requirements for their breed are, and then figure out based on the requirements of each breed how to balance that horse and him use his body optimally to do the job that the people are trying to do with it.
So, so with regard, so like a Tennessee Walker, I would say is probably the most common, well-known, broad spectrum gated breed out there, at least in the United States, that people might be
Right.
familiar with. And it has, you know, its specific gait, which is basically the same footfalls and beats as the walk, although they
Absolutely.
can somehow manage to walk up to 30 miles an hour and just be flying down the road.
Yep.
As a gated horse trainer, I'm trying to get a little better bead on some of the gaits, I guess. Um, like what would you do riding a Tennessee Walker to accentuate and affect the gait? So like what is involved in the timing of that, the way that you're riding them, that brings that out and enables that horse to walk at 30 miles an hour? And what might you do differently if you were, say, riding a Missouri Foxtrotter or a Saddlebred or a Paso or
I
something
would
like
not,
that?
I would personally not try to ride that Tennessee walking horse 30 miles an hour because it defaults the horse to the forehand when you do that. And he quits using his body correctly because when you develop a horse correctly, you develop the horse to carry himself on his hindquarters so he can protect himself. So the skeletal system doesn't take a beating. Um, in the animation in those breeds, of course, with the horse that goes 30 miles an hour, he's going to use his legs a little higher and a little farther. But in the show ring, those horses that are animated the animation is not natural. It is very, very much an acquired taste, and it's artificially put on those horses.
Okay. Well, I guess why don't we get into that a little bit? So the most well known of those artificial type gaits, I think, would be the big lick, as you're describing. So would you tell us what the big lick is, and maybe just a generic? I have a lot of questions for you here, so we'll definitely peel the layers on the onion down the road. But just what would be the generic version of what would go into achieving a big lick on a horse?
Well, they use a different shoe setup, and they have the shoes are built up shoes packages, if you would. They're layered plastic pads. It's a real hard plastic. Most of them come in a half-inch thick uh, uh, pad. They have some that are wedges where are a half-inch thick at one end down to nothing at the other end, and you stack those pads up, and you attach a metal shoe to the bottom, and then you attach it to the horse's foot. So the very pad next to the horse's foot, it's what you call a nail pad or a foot pad. It nails to the horse's foot like a horseshoe would, like a regular keg horseshoe. Once you get it attached, then you build the package to whatever angle and thickness you want, and you set it on the bottom, and you have sinker nails that drive down from the top of that pad that's next to the foot to hold the bottom on, and then they put a metal band, a strap across it that kind of keeps the pressure off of the nails. They do have regulations. The artificial extension in the toe cannot exceed half of the distance of the natural toe length. So if you've got a horse that's got a 4-inch natural toe, the pad in the toe, the thickness of the pads in the toe cannot exceed 2 inches, not counting the shoe. And then they have a heel toe measurement, because you want to wedge them up, because that's where you get those horses to hit on their heel just right. It helps the horse lift the front feet a little bit better, helps square the horse up, if you would. So in the heel toe ratio, you measure from the hairline of the horse's foot, coronary band to the ground in the toe, and then you move around to the heel. You measure from the coronary band, the hairline at the coronary band, down the pressure bearing center of the leg. You get to the coronary band and measure to the ground. The toe has to be an inch longer than the heel.
Okay. And so is that is part of what gives the big lick, and it's kind of a mechanical addition to the horse. Now the horse would gait without that package on there, but maybe not to the same.
They do the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 1, 2, 3, 4 beat. The animation is all artificial. They don't come out of mama with that big flamboyant way of stepping.
So is it what part of the package, the shoeing package we're talking about, is it the weight of it, or are they changing angles? What specifically in there is it that adds the animation?
It changes the horse. It changes the horse's center of gravity a little bit. And instead of the horse hitting flat, they hit more on their heel. But then in the big lick, they use an action device, which is actually a chain around the ankle that helps to animate it too. And that's where a lot of the controversy is, because in my experience, they do things to the pastern area of the horse to get a reaction from that chain.
Okay. And I just want to state here out loud, I'm going to be playing devil's advocate here somewhat in
Okay.
this to try to illustrate both sides of the argument, because this is a very controversial topic. I'm also going to say up front here, I am not an experienced part of this world, so
Right.
pretty much everything I know about it is from hearsay of other people and so forth. I will say I have in my business, I have actually started a lot of gaited horses. I've probably started, I don't know, near 100 head of Tennessee Walkers, but I start them just like a quarter horse. I don't gate them. I tell the owner just flat out, like, he's going to have a handle on him and all of the things just like a quarter horse. But if you want him to gate, you need to do that yourself or take him to a gated trainer later
Right.
or whatever. And then I have dealt with saddlebreds, and I've got a Missouri Foxtrotter in training here right now. So kind of a multitude and some passos. I've ridden pretty much the spectrum, but I in no way, shape, or form fully understand gating
Well,
and all of that. I don't know
I
how to do
will
that. So
I will tell you in the animation part, the horses that are real pacey, that are extremely lateral, they are not as easy to animate as like the saddlebreds, because the saddlebreds are predisposed to trot more than they are to rack. And the horse that travels in diagonal pairs versus lateral pairs is easier to get the animation out of.
okay, so I would say that, like, that's part of my confusion over what is gated, because I've ridden saddlebreds and they're not the same as quarter horses, but those three gaits, typical three gaits of walk, trot, and canter, seem to be there available to me in those horses without a whole
Yep.
lot of
Yep.
trouble. And
Yeah,
I've
with
got a
the
quarter horse here right now. I've had him for years. I own him, and I know his breeding, every part of him, and he feels to me an awful lot like a Tennessee Walker. There is some little different float
yep.
in his footfalls and so forth that a normal quarter horse doesn't have. But I don't understand that aspect of things well enough to have ever pinpointed what it is. But like, he definitely has he's 20% different than everything else.
Well,
There's some other
I,
thing going on.
I've had a quarter horse here that belonged to my daughter that had sort of a little shuffle step to him, more like a foxtrot. And he would walk out. We trail rode quite a bit, and she would ride him with the gaited horses, and he learned how to keep up at the walk. And I think that we walked that horse to the point that he developed what you would call an advanced displacement of the trot. Uh, and he had more of a foxtrot and covered more ground with his hindquarters. And he actually had this pretty much the same feel that you're talking about.
So you see the foxtrotter that I've got here right now, and in preparation for this, I went on YouTube and I just watched some different gaited horses and so forth. They really have the look to me like they're trying to canter on the hind end, and they're just not quite getting there, like, they're on the verge of, but just not quite rolling over into it. That's what it looks like to me anyway. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but that it has that sort of
It, it,
a
it
feel like
does.
you.
It does. And the gated breeds, for whatever reason, because I've done a lot of studying over the last 10 years, they're the only breeds that really promote a horse traveling on the forehand. In trying to take the stride away and develop the horse's carriage. And that's where you get a lot of that look. Uh, they get kind of tangled up in their hindquarters when you put them on the forehand and try to drive them on faster. They have a hard time figuring out where to go with the hindquarters.
Okay. Um. So you, and I'll just say I'm gonna stay away from the controversial stuff right now. I'm just trying to get the generic stuff in here again, where
Okay.
we all have kind of that basic understanding, and we'll definitely get into that later. Um. But I would say, like, I have seen some gated foals. I mean, 2 month old kind of foals that are pretty animated. They're not to the extreme of what you would see in the show ring of the big lick. But there's definitely, like you say, there's a gene. Like there's definitely a predisposition in the way some of those foals move. And I've seen, like, say, a paddock of Tennessee Walker foals. Some of them are don't really catch my eye as being different, and some of them definitely do. I had two horses here in training not that long ago, separate times, but they both came out of Tennessee and out of that world. I know they had both been shown. They were both still young, I think 3 and 4 year olds, and basically came to me to kind of get them a little broker again, sort of put the traditional Western handle on them. So they to me, both of these horses still had an extremely elevated, very, very, like, I could see their front legs as I'm riding them, which I don't normally have. Like there's just legs for days coming out of this horse. It's like you're riding a spider. There's just legs everywhere. And so, but those horses with me in training, certainly there was no soaring, they were, one of them was barefoot, the other one was just flat shod. So no chains involved. No, I definitely know for a period of months, none of that occurred to those horses. And still we had a very elevated, very animated front end and all of that. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, without getting into the controversial stuff heavy, is there a world of gating that is completely humane without anything people would ethically or morally object to? Or are we only talking about getting that last 10% involves doing things maybe, or what? How would you characterize that?
Absolutely. There is a world of gaited horses out there that actually do have, some leg action without being the soaring. And depending on the association, that's frowned upon. The mountain horses, they have 2 or 3 divisions that having any action whatsoever is frowned upon. And then they have one division where you want some action. But that takes a very talented horse. And, if you selectively breed, there are some horses that will have that leg action. If you've got a gaited horse that is extremely balanced and correct in gait, you can add speed and get some leg action. But the big flamboyant leg action, that you and I spoke about, that is more of what is artificially made. A lot of the speed racking type horses are a crossbred horse. A lot of times they're a cross between an American saddlebred and a standard bred, or an American saddlebred and a walking horse. And you've got a horse. When you cross an American saddlebred, you're crossing a horse that's predisposed to trot with a horse that may or may not be predisposed to trot. Most of the time they're predisposed to pace. But when you add that square traveling horse to the mix, you can get a little bit more action with the front end. And, some of the speed racking groups, the Shoba and 2 or 3 of those other groups that all they do is speed in flat shod, they will have a little more action than just your regular trail horse.
So let me ask you this, and I know there may be some gaited horse people listening to me talk that are just cringing about some of this stuff. When I say to you that I start them just like a quarter horse, and they're gonna drag a tire and side pass and stop, and a couple of oddities I'll say here that I have found that I can't think of an exception. So I'm going to say, while I have limited experience, I'm definitely talking more than 100 heads. So that's more than most people's experience. And I've kind of universally found this across the gaited breeds. They seem to have more trouble with the lateral maneuver. So as I'm trying to get them to 2-track and side pass, particularly if we're going forward and I need to move them over to I'm not going to say that they can't do it, but that is an uphill sort of a battle for them. It'll take me 8 times as long to get that to the same degree as it would on my standard stock horses. I have also found pretty universally, and this is one of those deals that seems paradoxical to me. When you look at them, generally gaited horses are not these big, heavily muscled type horses, and so I'm expecting them to be weak in the hind end, and I am consistently surprised by how strong they actually are in the hind end, even though they lack all of that muscling. To be honest with you, one of the problems I have had, I come from the cutting horse background, and it's very easy and natural for me to put a big stop on a horse. I have definitely had gaited horses that I put way too big of a stop on for the customer, and it was a problem. I had to go take some stop off, and you wouldn't think they would be able to do that, but I have no trouble getting gaited horses to slide 8 feet or something like that. They can get on their butt and lock it down just like a quarter horse can, and even better in some instances. So is there anything harmful in your belief of treating them that way and riding them? Is the postponing working on the gait gonna ultimately be a problem for the gait? Or we no harm, no foul? Or is there a better way to go about this? What are your thoughts there?
No harm, no foul. I start horses the same way you do, but I don't start them for the show ring. So I'm not ever going to move that horse out of a keg shoe. I don't. And the reason that the keg shoe makes the difference, for the show ring, you don't want that horse to square up too soon. So if I'm not training for the show, I want that horse to go ahead and square up and balance himself as soon as possible. So I want him to carry his body in the same posture that you want your quarter horse to carry his body in. And I want to ride that horse on as relaxed a rein as I can until he learns how to use his back correctly and kind of, start engaging in the thoracic sling. What you've run into with the gaited horses that you've ridden, the odd feeling, they feel kind of like a slinky. The ones that feel like a slinky are more on the forehand. They're not driving from the hindquarters. Most of the people that you've sent those horses home to that have had trouble with the big stop are used to riding a gaited horse, and most of the gaited horse people don't understand. They'll tell you that they ride the horse from the hindquarters, but they don't really. They're in time with the horse's front end, and they don't understand where the horse's back feet are at. And it's taken me a long time to retrain myself to slow down and teach my horses when I'm starting them under saddle to drag a log and to turn around the inside rear leg or the inside front leg. That's not anything that is taught to do in the gaited world. They are ridden in a straight line. And in most of the gaited breeds, the classification of each level is based on the equipment, not the level of training. So if you're riding in a pleasure division, they wear a different shoe than a performance division. And in some of the breeds, they've got a trail pleasure division, a country pleasure division, a show pleasure division, and all of that is dictated by the size shoe that you wear. So there's a lot of trick shoeing and playing with angles and playing with weight that goes with these horses that gets them to ride smooth and be for the breed association, if you would, in the correct gait, whether the horse is using his back correctly or not. The Tennessee walking horses have a phenomenal back end and are really, really, really strong. They've just bred those horses over years to have more of a stringline look. In a lot of cases, looking at those horses from the front, it looks like both of their front legs come out of the same socket. And those horses, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've probably not had one of those gaited horses yet that is the sickle hawk that you'd be scared to lope him across the pasture on a, with some terrace rows. You think his back end's going to come out from under him. And to me, that's the normal of what comes to me. And that's the horses to me that are the problem, because they've bred for this show look, and what's in the show ring, and in a lot of cases bred the strength out of their horse. But to answer your question, I don't start a horse any different than you do. doing what I do now, because it's about balance and longevity with me. You're going to get to the correct gait if the horse is using his back correctly. And you'll get to the correct gait if you don't ride him too fast early on, until he learns how to use his back and lift the sling correctly. What happens in the show world and in the speed world, those horses are traveling in false collection because they've been driven past their balance. So they have to use the weight of the shoe, the angle of the shoe, or the surface that they ride the horse on to kind of foster a false collection.
They're kind of burning the candle at both ends there.
Exactly.
And it may seem like I'm gonna toggle back and forth between devil's advocate and
Well,
accusation and going, why in the hell are they?
This is a complicated subject, and I jumped at the opportunity to do this because there needs to be some clarity on it. In my travels, the people that come to me with problems have bought a horse, for the most part, not 100% of the time, but for the most part, bought a horse from somebody that trains more of a show type gaited horse than a using type gaited horse like you and I would use. Those horses are hard to maintain for an amateur or a novice person, somebody that wants to recreational ride, that doesn't have a skill set. They can ride pretty good and understand all the appointments of being in balance and using the reins correctly. But if you've ridden a horse, you've changed the weight of the shoes around and the angle of the feet around, and taught that horse to balance himself at a certain speed. And in a lot of cases, those horses can either do a trail walk or they can gait, but they don't have anything in between. Those horses are extremely hard for people to take home and maintain. And that's the very reason I'm doing what I do. There's got to be levels of elevation, if you would. That horse needs to transition from a walk to the next speed without losing his balance, all the way up through the paces till you get to the running walk, the foxtrot, specifically for the one speed where the horse is doing that prime gait that brings the maximum dollar. And that's a hard horse, real hard horse for people to take home and maintain.
So I would say, and I feel like it bears saying here, we may have a pretty broad audience listening to this. The majority of the people that own horses, somewhere in the 60% of all horse owners range, are air quotes just a trail rider. They are the people that are out there in the woods enjoying themselves, and I absolutely don't have anything against that. But the Tennessee Walker is probably the king of that group, at least from what I see of it. There's tons of horses out there that are hitting the trails and probably don't have any connection to the show world whatsoever. I would say exactly what you were just talking about. Like when we organize trail rides around here in Louisiana, there's typically two rides going on. There's going to be a gaited horse ride and then a quarter horse ride, because the gaited horses are going to go 10 miles an hour through the woods, and the quarter horses are going to go 3 miles an hour through the woods. And it's not a pleasurable experience to mix the two.
No, it's not.
So would you say that that's a fault, that the gaited horses should comfortably go 3 miles an hour as well and walk along without needing to kind of pick up the pace? Or what would your thoughts be on that? I have a specific question. I'm trying to find a way to work it in here. I always appeal to my Facebook group person.
Absolutely, I think it's a fault, because if you put a quarter horse and that gaited horse out there in the pasture together, and it's an hour before feeding time in the evening, and they walk from the lower pasture up to the barn, pretty much they walk right there together. That's been my experience. If you watch that gaited horse and that quarter horse move around the pasture together all day long, that gaited horse most of the time doesn't pick his head up above his withers and do that little saddle gait or that little rack that you see him do on the trail. He is able to walk around and move with that quarter horse just like a normal horse. So we have created this gaited horse that can't walk on a loose rein like a quarter horse. Now, the gaited horse does cover more ground per stride than a quarter horse. But if you develop a couple of different levels of carriage where that horse knows when you drop him down to like a free walk or a trail walk on a loose rein, that horse is not going to walk out and have as much life in his feet as he does when you pick that rein up and ask him to move out. That's in the training. That's not in the horse. And in my estimation, the gaited breeds are 20 years behind in their level of education of understanding the anatomy of the horse and how to develop those horses correctly where they are anatomically correct going forward. Because what I run into in my travels is horses that, like I said a few minutes ago, they can stand still or get to that 10 to 12 mile an hour speed, but nothing in between. And when you try to ride those horses in between there, they don't know where their feet are. They act neurologic. And in my part of the country, people are having a hard time with veterinarians saying the horse is neurologic, but they can't pinpoint it. It's because the horse's anatomy's not been developed correctly.
I like that. So I'll just specifically get into this because it kind of ties in two questions that I had. When I was a pretty young guy and was really breaking a lot of horses and would kind of take anything, I would have rode a cow if somebody had paid me to do it. There was a particular owner that raised saddlebreds that I would start horses for, and those were going from me to a trainer.
Yep.
And so I was kind of caught in between the two. So the owner would tell me that, the trainer's going to tell you, don't you dare lope this horse. But I want you to lope this horse and I want them to move out. But we're not going to admit to the trainer that you ever loped him because he's going to lose his mind if you tell him that you did that. But I'm paying you and I want you to do that. So I would take him out in the woods and we would lope down the right of ways and all that kind of stuff. And I always thought that was kind of funny. And it never made sense to me why, if I cantered, that was going to destroy the gait, but I didn't have an understanding of the gait. And I was 20. So I'm going to argue with, these two older men that had been doing this longer than I'd been alive. So, do you think there's anything to that? Is there any reason why they shouldn't canter as well? Is there a harm there? Or
I have people tell me all the time that they've been told not to lope their horse because it'll ruin the gait. And they will come to me and say, can you help me lope my horse? And I will say, absolutely. Bring your horse and let's do an evaluation. And I'll tell you how hard it's going to be to lope him, because you and I discussed earlier, 80% of these horses are traveling on the forehand. You can't develop a lope if the horse doesn't push off from the hindquarters. And that is where there's a lot of confusion in the gaited world. Now, the Tennessee walking horses, a lot of those canter, but if you watch how they depart to canter, they pick the horse's front end up and depart it from the front end and not the hindquarters. It's hard in the world that I live in, that 60% of the people in the world that trail ride, those that come to me that are part of that 60%, 95% of them are women from the age of 60 to 70 and on up that rode trotting horses, that rode dressage, that rode reining, that rode some other discipline besides gaited horses, and they got to a point in their life where they wanted the smooth ride. So they bought a gaited horse and then was told that the horse didn't canter. And they all had problems trying to canter the horse. And I'm like, well, we've got to teach the horse to gait correctly from the hindquarters, and then we can depart the canter. That's a huge problem. That's you've looked at my website, you looked at my Facebook page, you know how much anatomy and the horse being correct in his carriage that I talk. That's where the trouble is across the board in the gaited breeds. They've not studied this horse biomechanically enough. They've not gotten with the experts enough that understand how these horses' bodies work and how the flexure chain and the extensor chains of muscle that's connected from the hindquarters all the way to the head. They haven't figured out that you've got to develop each part of that for the horse to be correct to optimally do the things people want to do with him. If that horse is not using the muscle chains and he can't push off from the hindquarters, you can't canter him. Daniel, you did those horses a service if you loped them, because you made their life easier in the training arena because the horse was already using his back correctly.
It never made sense to me why it would be harmful. I mean, we see, I've also dealt with racehorse trainers that absolutely would crucify you if you ever said the word whoa, or if you turn them to the right.
Yeah.
So we kind of have some of these traditions out there that just are mind boggling, but hey, whatever floats your boat, but nothing's leaving my barn that doesn't turn right
Well,
or
mine
stop a
either.
little bit, or it's going to have to be basically correct.
Absolutely. And if they come to my place and I have enough time to teach them to canter, that is a great gait to develop lift in the thoracic sling. It's a great gait to teach that horse, because the horse has to tilt his pelvis just a little bit to depart the canter. So you're helping the horse anatomically to teach them how to depart that canter correctly.
So you've kind of opened the can of worms on conformation and biomechanics and all of this. And you mentioned earlier there is a specific gene that goes toward gait that all gaited horses share. So is there anything conformationally different about these gaited horses that enables them to move this way? Is there something there, or no? They're all built the same, and
they have the same structure that any other breed of horse does. Now, looking at the different breeds of horses, some are a little more compact, some are a little more streamlined, but they're not like the Arabian. The Arabian, they have different ribs than all the other horses do. The gaited horses are not that way. They have the same, their cervical spine, the thoracic spine, the lumbar part, it's all the same. They don't have more or less uh, uh, links in the spine. It is all absolutely the same. And I've been to dissections where I could absolutely talk about this and argue the point. The only thing that makes the gaited horses be different to me, based on my travels and my experiences, they've bred those horses to have a different look. And you get a set of Tennessee walking horse papers. I'm not as up to speed on the mountain horses and some of the other breeds, but you get a racking horse set of papers, spotted saddle, Tennessee walking horse. They are all very closely related. It's not uncommon to have well, I'll just throw a name out there. Pride's Generator. He was a prolific sire for a long time in the Tennessee walking horse breed. It's not uncommon right now to have Pride's Generator 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 times in the pedigree on a Tennessee walking horse. So when you breed that close, you're going to get the talent, but you're going to get all the stuff that comes along with it too. You're going to get all of the good stuff, but all the bad stuff creeps up too. And a lot of times it shows up conformationally.
well, one of the and as I'm saying this, I can think of some notable exceptions, but I'm going to throw this out there anyway, just kind of the 101 for dummies version. But in terms of an obvious thing that is pretty much a norm with gaited horses, it's the overstepping with the hind end. So, and I know you know what I'm talking about, but just so everybody does, if we had a pristine new arena that had just been tilled up and was nice and fluffy, no hoof tracks in it whatsoever, and then you walk a Tennessee walker out there and his left front foot hits the ground, and then you walk him farther and his left hind foot hits the ground, the left hind is probably going to overstep the track of the front by 6 inches or maybe more, depending on how hard he was being pushed, where a typical quarter horse is probably going to be 3 inches short of getting to the front hoof track and so forth. So they have this sort of an extended range with those hind legs. They really can spread them out. And it's I don't know if it's a flexibility or if the pelvis angle is a little different or what, but they do seem to have a lot more reach with those hind legs than some other breeds. Now, the exception to that, I'm thinking, is like a Pasifina, where everything is kind of straight up and down, and they're like a sewing machine, but they're not, reaching forward at all. So does that factor in, or is that part of the gating aspect, I guess, or is that more than just what's been bred for, so that they have more speed,
Well,
more range?
in the Tennessee walking horse, you want the overstride. In the racking horse and the spotted saddle horse, they're looking for the overstride. But you look at the mountain breeds, you are penalized for the overstride. In those breeds, they don't want the deep back end. They want it more to look more like a Pasifino. To develop these horses anatomically, you have to have that overstride for a little while to get enough engagement from the hindquarters for the horse to be over the back enough to get the horse to use his body correctly. And that's kind of the controversy I'm in with folks now. When I do a clinic, I'll have 2 Tennessee walking horses, 2 or 3 Rocky Mountain horses, a Pasifino, and then a couple of foxtrotters. And I've got to be able to teach to everybody. So studying the anatomy like I have, and understanding how the horse's body works, at a good free walk, I want a little bit of overstride on those horses until they learn how to maintain a level of carriage across the back. So I'm gonna use some terms here. You're familiar with what a long and low posture would be. I want that horse to have the freedom of his head, whether he carries it close to the ground or just straight out from his withers. I want the throat latch open, and I'm going to ride that horse with some overstride until that horse's locomotion changes just a little bit. And you've ridden a trotting horse, when they start developing a little bit of carriage, their back changes and you feel more of a spring under you. The trot gets a little bit softer. You understand what I'm saying? It's the same thing with a gaited horse. When they get over the back, and you can not concentrate as much on the overstride, but start concentrating on the carriage, the horse's back will change, just like the quarter horse's back changes. And it's taken me the last 8 years experimenting to figure out how to do this to where I can teach it to other people.
That brings up a just one of these little thoughts or things, a tip to throw out to people, I guess is what I'm saying. This is one of those videos I've been meaning to shoot for a while. I've got so many videos I haven't gotten to yet, but if you will watch a horse's hock while you're lunging them around or sending them around or something, it's actually a very good physical indicator of when they're warmed up and when things are going. So like what you're talking about, if a horse is a little stiff, not warmed up, or maybe a little fresh, a little playful, that hock will move in an arc back and forth. And when they start getting warmed up and softening mentally, the arc turns into an ellipse. So that's when the horse is starting to get some flexion in the hind end. They're bending down, they're softening, and that's kind of when they're really ready to go. If we just wanted to purely think about a colt bucking, a colt with a soft hock is not going to want to buck, but a colt that's moving in that arc, that's when we might have a little rigidity in there we need to work out before we risk putting our fanny up in that saddle. So just something for y'all to pay attention to if you're out there working a horse on the ground or something like that.
Well, and in the gated breeds, I tie that hock to the head motion. And the reason I do, and there's gated breeds that say they're not supposed to shake their head, but at a free walk, your quarter horses, a thoroughbred, an Arabian, at a balanced walk, a 1, 2, 3, 4 walk with a 3 foot, 2 foot carrying pattern, all of those horses shake their head in relation to how the body moves. So I'm watching that hock, but I'm watching how that horse's neck and head moves in relation to what the hock's doing before I ever try to go past any more development in the horse, because right there, until you get those two completely together, that horse is not balanced.
I talk about a similar aspect. I'm bringing it up more in terms of contact with the horse, because people, they get into contact with the reins, they tend to have their hands sitting there. If you envisioned a horse at rest and a rod going through his shoulders perpendicular to the horse, their hands would be in line with that rod. But the thing that those reins are attached to, his head, is doing what you're talking about. It's going left and right like a fish as he is moving forward. And if your hands aren't going left and right with him, you're giving him a bump, 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 bump that means absolutely nothing. And you should not be. If you're doing that, you're getting in that horse's way. And so that's one of the things I try to get people to think about in contact is your hands should not be sitting here parallel. You should be going one hand forward, like if the horse's nose is tipping to the right, your left hand needs to go forward to accommodate and give him some rein so he can do that. And then when he goes back with the next step to the left, your right hand needs to go forward so his nose can go left. And that horse will, if you're having problems with your horse not being free moving or whatever, try that, and that will be a miraculous thing for you. And it's how we should all be taught to ride in contact, and it is very, very seldom seen.
I do that at my clinics, and I call it riding in rhythm. You watch the horse's shoulders and your hands follow his shoulders forward, one then the other, one then the other. And until you can maintain that, you will never develop a correct gait in a gaited horse. Now you can take it to the local gaited trainer and he can nail his shoes on there, and he can go from my sand arena out here to the asphalt in front of the house and ride him real fast on slick pavement, say he's in gait. But is he in gait, or have you played with his proprioception and got him in false collection to where he's just trying to stay balanced on that asphalt?
Yes, sir. Well, given what we're about to get into, I think this might be a good time to bring our sponsor in and pay the bills.
Okay.
So we've got a special sponsor for you, Carl. This is a bit company that is brand new, and they are catering to the gaited horse world. So the Mouse King Bit Company proudly announces our newest line of gaited horse bits, the Rack and Stack Bracers. Is your horse a little prone to going out of control from time to time? Could they go smoother and faster, but you're not quite sure what to do? Is the action you're getting not as satisfying as it could be? Try our new line of bits for gaited horses, the Rack and Stack Bracers. Braces and bits aren't just for cordlessly drilling holes anymore. These new bits take all the guesswork and skill out of horsemanship. Anyone can get world championship results if you've got the cash. Strong enough for the trail, but made to give a show, these bit cheeks have extra bracing, but it's very stylish with design choices ranging from dragons to mermaids. We've even got impregnated mouthpieces for those horses who don't like to take the bit. Does your horse like graham crackers? We've got a graham cracker flavored lozenge. What gaited horse doesn't enjoy brie or a nice smoked Gouda? We've got it. If you're more into the exotic breeds, we've got durian and dragon fruit flavored mouths that are sure to please. You've heard for years about bits with tongue relief to make the horse not resent hard-handed riders. We've taken that concept to new levels, using engineers that nearly got hired on at Tesla. You won't believe the results or the price. We've got in-house financing and leasing options for those in need. They'll get their head up and their hind legs are reaching like never before. Stop wasting your time on education and clinics. A bit of knowledge puts way too much pressure on you, and this is supposed to just be an easy, fun hobby. You just need the right bit. Mouse King Bit Company. All right, we've paid the bills now, so I feel better.
I love that Mouse King Bit Company. You cannot imagine how often I get asked that question. What kind of bit do I use on my horse to get him to gait? And there is no answer my answer is every person that rides a horse needs to learn how to balance a horse in a snaffle bit. If you're dependent on those reins for anything other than that, you are not safe, and neither is your horse.
So I know this is something you're against, but I definitely wanted to kind of get into it, and maybe you can explain the theory behind it or whatever. But when I think a gaited horse, that's kind of what I think. We've got a huge bit in their mouth. It's probably even got bracing going from the top ring of the purchase all the way down to the bottom ring of the shank, so we don't bend something on the bit. And we've got a horse that's flying with a hollow back and his chin way up in the air and just heading down the road. And it's never been a silhouette that I appreciate or really wanted much to do with. So what is the, and again, I know your life's work is against this, but why do they think that jacking their chin way up in the hair where they can't see where they're going and hollowing out the back is, why is that such a common silhouette to see?
Because they're trying to get the horse to feel smooth at any cost. So the rule of thumb is you sit completely back on your tailbone. You don't sit on your seat bones. You push your feet out in front of the cinch of your saddle, and you push down with your seat to get the horse to move out. And then you use your hands, and you're asking him to go and saying whoa at the same time. And when he gets smooth, you're in gait. And that is the rule of thumb, that, whoa and go at the same time. And it evades me. What happens is those horses in that hollow posture are really not that smooth to ride. They're just sitting so incorrectly that they're absorbing some of the shock of that horse's back based on the way that they're sitting. Those horses have been pushed to the point, like we said in the conversation earlier, they got two speeds, dead still and wide open. Those horses are not any different than a horse that's been taken to the local barrel jackpot too many times and he can't walk down the chute. That horse has run around those barrels and been pushed to run, so that's all that's on his mind is getting through that gate and running wide open all the time. That is another fault in the gaited world. We don't teach balance. We don't teach correct carriage. The entire gaited world lives on smoothness. You want a smooth gait. And it's job security for me, because there's lots of curriculums out there that emphasize sitting incorrect and using the bit. And when the people come to me and the horses, they can't control him because he's been pushed to that gate to the point when they go to the trail, it don't matter how much shank you've got on the bit, they can't slow him down. And they say, what are you going to do? Can you fix this? And I'm like, yeah, he's into pressure. You got to change his thought pattern and get the pressure out of the way and teach the horse to use his hindquarters instead of being on the forehand trying to catch up. Well, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to take the bit off of him. Well, how are you going to stop him? I'm like, I'm not going to. I'm going to let him go. And in about 3 strides after he realizes I'm not going to pull on him, he'll slow himself down. You can't imagine how many horses I've seen that I've taken that shank bit off of and either put a rope halter or a snaffle bit on and just laid the reins down in front of the saddle and gone with the horse. They took off just like the folks said they would. In less than a round in my arena, that horse is walking on a loose rein. And the horse just goes like a big sigh of relief. And people don't understand that. How did you slow him down? I'm like, well, I rode him forward. Well, what do you mean you rode him forward? I got in time with his hindquarters with my seat, and I sat correct where I was in the movement with the horse, and I slowed my seat down, and the horse slowed down and was glad to do it.
I hope that made sense to everybody. It made perfect sense to me, and I would love to hear you repeat that another 150,000 times to every one of those people out there that I'm seeing doing this stuff that scratches my head. I find myself in an awkward position sometimes because I am, we've got a bunch of people, a movement going on about bits are evil and bad and this, that, and other, and I'm trying to dispel that with education. But at the same time, I also very commonly see bits being used in horrific ways that, turns my stomach and I can't hardly stand to watch. And at the end of the day, it's not the bit. The bit's just an inanimate object up there. It's how we go about using these things,
But the horse
so
has to make friends with the bit. So it's your job. It is your job to understand how that horse's mouth has to work for the horse to be able to make friends with it. You can't imagine at my clinics, because we talk about the hyoid apparatus, and I don't go into great detail, but we talk about all the different places that it connects in the horse's body. And I've had people from the show world actually get up from my presentation, my PowerPoint presentation, with tears in their eyes and said, "I had no idea that that's what I was doing to the horse." And I liken it to sitting in the dentist chair with the tongue suppressor and the dentist over the top of you, and you're trying to breathe, and you feel like your nasal passages are closing down and your tongue's swelling, and you see it on the horse. You see it on the horse because that's exactly what happens to them. And then they start this profusely sweating, which absolutely depletes. You can tell all the oxygen's being depleted out of their body. And these people are hanging on for dear life saying, "Doesn't he look good?" You can't imagine what it does to me to be at a clinic and be able to help somebody figure that out with a horse.
yes, sir. I'm sure it's a very, very good feeling and very satisfying and fulfilling. Um, it does boggle my mind sometimes, the people that have been around horses for decades and the things that they don't know about that animal, just like what you're talking about, the things we normalize. This is really the catalyst that caused me to reach out to you. We had just said this will come out like a month or a month and a half later than what we're talking, but while we're talking, the Charlotte Duhardine thing has happened not long ago. We're at the tail end of the Olympics, and you had done a post on your Facebook page with pictures of some gaited horse, just
Yep.
the mouth and the bit, and the mouth is wide open and the tongue's blue and all the foam and all of that stuff. And so I guess now we'll get into the uncomfortable part of the conversation.
Well, let me explain that to you. I know it is crazy for you to wrap your mind around people that have been in the horse business that long. I was one of those people. I was very successful in the horse world and so completely proud of my ignorance that I could absolutely explain anything away with more ignorance. And what happened to me when I got out of the show world, I learned out real quick that any level of competition, because I went from the big lick world, I was going to do local shows. Well, those folks wanted to cheat too, just on a different level. So I decided to just start retraining horses and developing trail horses. So I had to get rid of all the gimmicks. And when you spent 40 plus years of your life gimmick training a horse, and you wake up one morning and decide that you're going to use a snaffle bit, a keg shoe, no more than a keg shoe if the horse needed a shoe, in the seat of your pants, it hit me like a ton of bricks how much I didn't know. And I grew up in that gated world, and it really opened my eyes to how much education there was not in the gated breeds and the need for that. And that's the journey that I'm on. Before we talk about bits, I'll throw this in there because I traveled a little while and was trying to promote. I worked trying to get the legislation passed with the PAST Act, and you can bring that up if you want to. You don't have to. And I wrote some letters and participated with that. But what I realized was the only thing that was going to make any difference at all was for me to be the change that I wanted to see, and to take my show on the road, and instead of pointing a finger and telling everybody how stupid they were, for me just to make the change, learn how to do it in the snaffle bit, and take my show on the road and show people how to do it. And here we are.
Well, I'm glad that you did. I'm wholeheartedly behind that message. I think I am going to put my devil's advocate hat back on, and we'll get into some of that. Um, so again, I'll start this by saying I've never been a part of that world. If you told me that I needed to soar a horse or make some chains up or whatever, like I would be as clueless as I possibly could be. Um, I I am aware, the Horse Protection Act of 1970 outlawed soaring. So the soaring has been outlawed and illegal for a long, long time. I find it difficult to wrap my head around that there really is that much cheating still going on and this practice still exists. Maybe it's just more comfortable for me to say that it's just these singular isolated incidents of some asshole over here that got caught. It's hard for me to believe that everybody is doing this. Is it really that prevalent, or is it the one bad actor every once in a while?
You cannot produce that lick in the way that horse travels behind, kind of a struggling look behind, without that horse having been soared at some point in time. The
Would you
goal,
explain to us in a little more detail exactly what soaring is, what that process is?
you use some kind of chemical astringent around the front ankles to get a reaction to the chain. Then you've got the chain and you've got the built up shoe on that's got different angles to it. And in a lot of cases, uh, right before showtime, you change the angles. You can add a wedge or take a wedge out of the package very, very simply and change the angle and change the way that the chains hit on the horse's feet. But the soaring is to get a reaction from the chain, and it's not necessarily as much to make the horse step really high as it is to get the horse to really hunker down behind and really, really get their hocks close to the ground behind. And it's a form of false collection, is all that it is. And to prove that those horses are traveling in false collection, look at the way that the riders hunch over. There's no circle of aid, circle of energy in the horse because the horse is not carrying himself correctly. All the energy stops right there at the withers where the rider's sitting all hunched over.
Well, that
And
was a question that I was going to ask because it doesn't seem like something. It doesn't wouldn't be my first thought that, hey, I'm going to put a tuxedo on and go hunch over on a horse with my legs straight and stiff and splayed out like this. It doesn't look like a real good time to me. But
well, people say it's because those horses squat down behind. The rider sits that way to keep from sliding off. That's the farthest thing from the truth. I've rode, well, in my lifetime, I've ridden many of them. My first appearance in the Tennessee Walking Horse National Celebration, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. The first time I ever showed in Shelbyville. So I rode those horses my entire life. The horses, that look in the trainer, absolutely. The way the rider's sitting on is because the horse is traveling in false collection.
so, like, I don't have a dog in the fight here, and there's really nothing about watching the big lick that appeals to me. I actually honestly prefer the flat shod classes and all that. That looks more, the big lick is so strange. Like you might as well be riding a giraffe. It's not even horse like what's going
Oh,
on right here. Like
it
it's a,
is an acquired
you
taste.
know,
It's I liken it to an addiction. It's more of an addiction than it is anything else. And it can be, if you ever ride it one time, it's not like anything you can describe. Um,
I could definitely see that. Yes, sir.
but the selling point to it is it's not extremely difficult to ride. So if you wanted to participate in an equestrian sport, it's one of the more easy sports disciplines to move into. You don't have to have just a great big amount of skill to show in a lot of those classes and be competitive. You more
You're
or
not
less
getting
just
flung around left and right and that kind
no,
of
no,
thing. It's
they're
just, yeah.
extremely smooth to ride, and if you can sit down and just hold on to the reins and stay in the center of that horse's back, those horses are pretty well taught how to follow that rail.
So in your opinion, is there a salvation for the big lick? Can that be done? Maybe if I guess really at least for me, the unethical part of that is the soring. If we take the astringent out of there and we don't have any inflammation of skin or any of those sorts of things, but we still use the padded shoe and I guess the chain or whatever. And like in my mind, I don't even know what that actually means. I can't say that I've ever even seen a picture of what the chain on the foot looks like and so forth. So maybe seeing that I would have a different opinion. But is there, if we could just, or first of all, let me ask this: is the application of that astringent and working it in and getting them actually sore in the skin right there, in your opinion, that is absolutely going on very widespread right now today?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
If we could actually go ahead.
But there's degrees of soreness. So I want you to understand that in those people's minds, they are conditioned to believe that a horse that passes the inspection process is not sore. No matter what they've done to him, if he passes the inspection process, he's not sore. He's compliant. And
Okay.
there's got to be a way to figure that out. But that's not up to me.
That is a complicated, yeah, and we'll get more into detail of exactly what that inspection process is, because it does to me seem pretty. I can't see how someone could cheat and pass it, but I do acknowledge that someone could have had that horse sore 7 days before, and now he's no longer actively sore and inflamed, but he still has the memory of it and still would be responding the same way and all.
Well, then a whole lot of that goes on because you learn through the training process. Each horse is different. Some horses take more and some horses take less. But the horses that take a whole lot are not the ones that you're going to worry about going through the inspection process. It's the horses that are real sensitive that don't take a whole lot are the ones that act up in the inspection arena. I never, when I went to the horse show, I never worried about the sorest horse on the trailer going through inspection. I always worried about that one that didn't take a whole lot, cause he was going to be the one that would act up and not do like he was supposed to in inspection.
Well, I mean, that part of it, like, and let me say here too, because the owner of those horses may be listening to this, and I'm not accusing. I have no idea what happened to those horses before I got them. They were both easy to be around. No indications of abuse or anything like that to me whatsoever. But like I say, I rode them both months, and they maintained that same sort of level of action and everything throughout, despite me not doing anything. Now, I wasn't watching videos of me riding them, and my eye certainly isn't attuned to the levels of this. So maybe you would have looked at those horses and said, well, that's a crappy big lick. He's hardly doing anything. We want him to be, way more accentuated and so forth. But I know that they're.
What I would have said is he's slick. He ain't deep enough behind.
Okay. Well, maybe so. Yes, sir. But I know that like their performance in that did not change over the course of time. And I know I certainly wasn't doing anything to aid that or accentuate it. And so it seems to me that that's just more how that horse moved, or they were trained to move this way, and then they were happy enough to continue to do it, even though the guy on their back at this point had no idea how to still pull the strings. So.
Developing that horse to maintain what he does with his front end versus being deep enough in the hindquarters and having more of a defined, pronounced lick. You were probably riding that horse on just a little bit, and he had a slick little way of traveling with a little bit of action, like out for a Sunday afternoon ride. Those horses in the show ring don't fare real well in front of the judges. They want one that's got more of a pronounced, hunkered down, kind of a grind in gear in the hindquarters. Now, as those horses go, they get a little bit more flamboyant in the front end. But like I said a few minutes ago, the soaring is not as much for the lick of the front end as it is to get that horse where he needs to be with his hindquarters in what they call deep enough or square enough.
Okay. So just so that everybody kind of has an idea of the inspection process, because that's really where I was going to definitely get into the past act with you. That's where the past act is concentrating and so forth. So my understanding of that, and please jump in anywhere that you want, is that there are inspections before these shows. As I understand it, that's pretty much the norm. I don't know if there's exceptions to that in any show, or if it's geographically specific or anything like that. But sometimes the inspectors are veterinarians that could work for the USDA and are trained, and sometimes the inspectors might be one of the owners, somebody's buddy, another trainer, and so maybe the level of ethics applied to the stringency of the inspection could be in question. I have heard of this would be one of the areas I would have concerns. So I've heard of some activist type veterinarians within the USDA. I've heard from multiple people who were in the room when this occurred that the head USDA veterinarian that is over all of this is actually not even a horse vet. He's a primate vet and doesn't seem to be a fan, and is kind of trying to get all of that stuff outlawed, and made the comment in front of a room full of trainers that, and this was on an older version of the past act. So this all took place years ago, and we'll, as far as I'm concerned, the real concerns I had with the past act have been fixed, but I'll bring that up point by point. But he made the comment that under the past act as it was written those years ago, that he could see any act of riding a horse as being an act of soaring because it all had the potential of causing the horse pain. So no astringency, no chain, no whatever. You could ride that horse in the woods. He could get galled. We cause the horse pain. That's an act of abuse. In other words, he had the road in front of him to shut the whole damn thing down. And that is very, very scary. So that to me is the line we're walking here of how freely we use the word abuse and so forth. That's where I get really, really scared.
I get it. I get it. I understand that.
And through that process, I guess I have heard of like particular USDA veterinarians. To my knowledge, there were 2 of them that have since been dismissed because they had so many complaints over a 5 and 6 show period, but they basically weren't passing anything. And you've spent all this money, you come to the show and you have no recourse. Like you're even if nothing legally happens to you or you can appeal it, you still missed that show. You couldn't. And if that's the big show of the year, like they could sink the whole ship right here and now, and nobody can show anything. And so that's again a concern of mine. And even putting in place, let's take the particular personal feelings of any USDA inspector or whatever out of play. If we put into place that we now have to have these inspections legally for this show to occur, all that has to happen at some point is for someone in an appropriations committee to defund the inspectors, and now by default the shows can't occur. And if you don't know this, ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly how slaughter ended in the United States. Slaughter was not actually banned. It was a requirement that USDA inspectors had to be in the plants, and then they defunded the USDA inspectors. So that's not a hypothetical thing I'm thinking of here. This is in the playbook and has been used before. So that's my real concern with this, is that we get the ball rolling on. Now we have to have USDA inspectors here for these gaited horse shows. Now we expand this to other breeds. Now it includes rodeo and racetracks and everything you could think of. And then we defund the inspectors, and now nothing can happen. Yeah. And I don't think that's as far from possibility as many people would maybe think. So now I'll turn it over to you. I talked a long time, so go ahead.
Well, I have the same concerns because the world we live in today is ever changing, And you know, we're in the information age, and anything that, well, I mean, you're in Louisiana right now and I'm in Georgia, and we're looking at each other having a conversation. So that's how quickly stuff can travel. The Tennessee walking horse has been in self-regulation for years and been being monitored by the USDA. What has happened time and again is the inspectors in self-regulation have turned in their statistics and said things are this way, and then sometimes the USDA would spot check and show up and find some problems, which gave them due cause to question the self-regulation. I will tell you, based on my experience, there's as many politics in the inspection arena as there are in the show arena. And what I mean by that is, um, there's favors played in there, and the people, for the most part, that inspect those shows are really familiar with, and then sometimes friends with the people competing. So there is a conflict. I feel like on some level, if they're going to do the inspection process, there needs to be an entity outside of the USDA and outside of the industry that could be hired, a veterinarian or somebody like that, if you would, to do the inspection process. I don't know how that works out. What I can tell you, based on my experience, show season every year starts in March for the Tennessee walking horse and all those breeds that are named that have to go through the pre-show inspection. So every February, the USDA will have a training session, and sometimes they do it jointly with the different horse industry organizations that are licensed to inspect the show. Sometimes they do it independent, but they give all of these different breeds an operating plan for the year, and it comes out sometime the end of February, the 1st of March, as to what the inspection process looks like for this calendar year. In my experience, we get the operating plan end of February, 1st of March. That gives us 2 or 3 weeks to figure out how to get around the new rule and keep doing business as usual. You know, years ago they came up with the gas chromatic stomographer. They could actually take swabs and swab the horse's foot and send it off and see within a certain period of time anything that had been applied to that horse's ankle. They thought that was going to end the soring, but chain of custody of the swabs came into play. So if you get a swab that tests positive, you get a letter of warning, no suspension, no ramifications, no nothing like that. They did the same thing with the heat detection device. Tracy Turner, veterinarian, I forget where he's from. He was absolutely on to what was going on, covering up some of the horse's scars and things to that nature with his technology. But then they started using a chemical called Surpass. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a topical agent that you can rub it on your skin, and it's like sunscreen. It just disguises everything and makes it look cold. Here again, the horse wouldn't pass inspection with that on there. He would get sent back because a horse's foot will have some degree of heat in it. So the horse would not be eligible to show, and you would get a letter of warning. But these type situations gave the USDA enough cause to say, look, they're trying to cover something up. They're hiding something. Our hands are tied because of chain of custody and things to this nature. So it's just been one game right after the next. Circumventing the law has been the game of the Tennessee walking horse folks ever since I was a kid. That they can figure out how to get around anything other than just sound the horses up. I don't know that there's a surefire way to not ever have some players in the game that don't soar the horses. But if they start judging a different type of horse and looking for a different type of horse in the show arena, that sore horse will not be one that's looked for. if they'll do what they need to do. But you and I having this conversation, we talked about Charlotte's experience in getting disqualified from the Olympics. How much controversy is there in the way the Olympic horses are carrying themselves in being judged? I mean, it's across the board. Where's the fix for this? So that's the reason I got off of that, trying to get the PAST Act, and I'd like to see the legislation passed on some level just to protect the horses. But I felt like I was doing a better service to the horse industry by educating people on what is and what could be done versus pointing a finger at everybody saying y'all are wrong.
So let me ask you this. I went and dug up the current version of the PAST Act. I've said many times, I'll just say it again, so it's kind of on the record. The last version that passed was in 2016 or 2017. It did have some language in it I found very concerning.
Yep.
And that was, I'm going to paraphrase, but it was basically they were going to legally define as cruel any act that could foreseeably be expected to cause pain to an animal. And I know on the surface that sounds like a reasonable statement, but how does your farrier test for a hoof abscess without reasonably expecting to cause pain to the animal? How do you breed a mare because she's going to foal one day and that's expected to cause pain to her? How does a veterinarian do a lameness examination? He's looking for where the pain is. How do you pull a Coggins test without sticking them with a needle and causing them pain? So I've always had a pretty big objection to that notion of pain as being the metric that we use. It's just it's an impossible standard.
And I have experienced inspectors that looked like, beyond any measure of doubt, had some kind of agenda past implementing the operating plan for that calendar year. I've witnessed both sides of it, and I don't know where the answer is. I had hoped on some level, in 2020, we had a revision that was going to be, it was a version of the PAST Act. Marty Irby was one of the authors of it. It was going to change some of the wording of the PAST Act and put into place, they were going to reduce the shoe, do away with the action device, the set tails. They were actually going to have the shoes that you could remove them in the inspection process to see the sole of the horse's foot, and there is a way to do that. But all of the players wouldn't come to the table, and all of the players being some of the animal rights groups. I felt like at that point in time that it was the best opportunity that the Tennessee walking horse ever had, because everybody was willing to sit down at the table. But some of the humane groups walked away from it and were not satisfied. It was the PAST Act. It was all or none. And I know some of those people that feel that way, and I agree with them up to a point. But here we are 4 years later, the Tennessee walking horse still looks the way it does. And based on my experience and what little information I have, I'm still friends with a few of those folks. But I can tell you beyond a measure of a doubt, I can watch a Tennessee walking horse travel and tell you when he's sore. A sore horse does not travel like a sound horse. And you in a sound horse with just the shoes and the chains on does not travel like a sore horse with just the shoes and the chains on. I can pick one out. So I know beyond a measure of a doubt that it's still happening. So I don't know what the answer is. I would like to see the whole thing go away. I'd like to see the horses, the greatest horse in the world. You can't imagine, well, you've worked some of them, you know how easy going they are. Other than being a little bit off balance because of the way they're put together. They've got great minds and they got a lot of try in them. I just don't know what the answer is, but I knew beyond any measure of doubt that having the government involved was not going to be something that was going to come to fruition. If you go to DC, you go to DC for funding. You don't go to DC for an answer. I mean, that's the bottom line. You know, that they can appropriate money and assign all the people in the world to take care of a problem, but until you recognize the problem for what it is, and until somebody from the other side steps up and says, hey, we've got one of the most marketable animals out there. If we just clean our image up, and you know, when people look at a gaited horse on the internet, they don't automatically think he's sore because of all we've done to him. If they would ever look at that situation, do something about that, I think it would all go away.
Well, you bring up a lot of points for me. So one thing is I did yesterday, I pulled up the current incantation of the past act. It has passed committee. I thought it had passed completely because I'm seeing that it's supposed to be implemented February 1st of 2025. Maybe not, but I read the whole thing. It's now 13 pages. There was nothing that I found in it that was offensive to me. Like, I mean, when I read it 7 years ago or whatever, that line slapped me in the face. I was like, that's going to be a problem. That's not that could be used against us and end the whole thing for sure. So there's nothing like that I see in there now, other than the slippery slope of what has already happened with the USDA and the putting the inspection process in place and then defunding it and killing the whole deal. So
the past act,
I would also say I do know. Go ahead.
If they implement the plan in 25 that they're supposed to, it will do the job that it's supposed to do. But there will be a lawsuit, and we're in an election year. So I'm optimistic, but I'm not counting on it.
And I just do want to say, I know I'm playing the devil's advocate here. I'm certainly not on board with soaring of horses until this conversation with you, like the thermal camera on the horse's leg. To me, that sounded pretty infallible. If there's inflammation, that's going to show up immediately. But I'm conflicted here. I mean, like I don't want soaring going on. I also don't want the government being carte blanche to show up at anybody's ranch at any point in time and go looking around and doing whatever the hell they want to do. I mean, we have a Fourth Amendment, so
they can't show up. They can't show up at your ranch. The inspection process is for show, sale, or public exhibition.
Okay, so this is you may not be aware of. Like this has already happened in the racehorse world. There was a commission formed called HISA, and that was law several years ago. And part of what I do have an objection to still in the past act is that it is, and if y'all read the past act, I mean, most of it is we're taking away this comma and replacing it with a semicolon. Like it's a big waste of time to read what's going on there. Most of it is nothing. But like with HISA and the racing world, they came at that basically through the commerce clause. And there's a lot of that in the past act. Part of the reason that we're federally regulating this is because you could sell that horse across state lines. You could take it to an auction. There's other people's money involved in here now. We've got transportation involved. And so we're coming at it from a consumer protection sort of an angle. With racing, we have gambling. And so you have the same sort of thing. And when HISA was implemented, it was the biggest clown show that you could possibly imagine, and all in the name of being better for the horse. So a couple of examples there. They came out and started dictating the type of shoe that you could put on the racehorse. Well, they were very specific about the shoe that you could use. Now, here's the interesting part. The shoe didn't exist. It was not a commercially made shoe. And all of a sudden, July 1st comes around and everybody has to use this shoe. And so now they're having to try to modify things. And now we are in an inspection project. We didn't buy a keg shoe that fit the criteria because it didn't exist. So we have to modify. And now Joe's got to measure something. And it could only have a 2 millimeter rim. And so that was totally theoretical. This shoe didn't exist. It hadn't been in play. We don't really know what happens when we put this on a horse and we go fast. And turns out what happens is they're put sweeps out from underneath them. And so they had a bunch of horses and jockeys that were getting hurt, and they made some amendments, and now you can have a 4 millimeter rim on the hinds only, except they didn't actually change the written law. They just said, we're not going to penalize you if there's a 4 millimeter rim on the hind. So now they got you in a catch-20. We're going to let you race, but at any point in time, we all know you've been guilty for this. And so if we decide to target you, we have all of the ammunition that we need. So that's sort of a mechanism in place. Is it just terrifies me of giving the government that kind of control. And again, this is not conspiracy theory stuff. I'm talking about stuff that has come to pass in the recent past. So I'm completely on board with you on that notion of self-regulation, and we are utterly failing at that. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. Like you mentioned, dressage. There was a study that came out not long ago. It was one of these cumulative studies that looked at a lot of other studies and years worth of tape. And even though horses behind the vertical in dressage is supposed to be outlawed at this point, they found out and statistically proved that the judges were significantly favorably judging it. In other words, you were at an advantage to be doing behind the vertical stuff, even though the rule book technically says you can't do that anymore. And so that's a self-regulation issue. That's the judging, right? Just like you said, if we weren't preferentially rewarding the horse that is sore and everybody knows is sore, then there would be no advantage to doing it anymore, and it would go away of its own volition if only we would self-regulate, right?
Well, I'll tell you what to do. Go to Shelbyville, Tennessee, the last Saturday night in August. That's the night they crowned the world grand champion Tennessee walking horse. And when they call the last class in the arena, they do it one by one. They announce the back number, the horse, the rider, and the owner, and they come in one at a time under a spotlight. Just go sit in the stands and watch. And I promise you, I'll bet you the biggest steak dinner that money can buy wherever you want to go. I'll bet you that you will be appalled at what happens. The most crippled looking horse that comes in the ring will be the one that gets the biggest applause and roar of the crowd.
Well, I believe you. I definitely can't contradict that, but it's a shame.
It is, and I got so sick. I loved the horses and got to the point I hated my job when I did that. I could not do something different fast enough when I got to that point. And I've been called a bunny hugger, and I've been called a tree hugger. You can't imagine some of the stuff that I've been called. But let me tell you two things I don't have to do anymore. I don't have to lie every day of my life, and I don't have to mistreat the horses to make a living. And that was every day of my life prior to that. When it was during show season, it was a daily process because you didn't soar the horse all at one time. You did it over several days because you wanted the horse to be optimally in response to the chain. You didn't want him so sore that he couldn't go. You wanted the right reaction to the chain, so you had to work at it. But the whole thing's based on a lie. And when you live a lie every day in the world in your career, then that lie takes over in different facets of your life. And when I decided to get out of that and do something different, it freed me of a lot of things. And what I hope over my journey is somebody else wanted to experience what I have, I could help them with the journey where they wouldn't have to lose as much and give up as much as I had to give up to make that same change.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that. I kind of say it as a somewhat of a joke, but anytime I'm doing presentations on bits and all, I start with anatomy, and we talk about body language and a lot of that stuff of this is showing dysfunction. And I always put a little warning in there of, I'm going to warn you that once you start seeing this stuff, you can't unsee it, and you're going to see it everywhere.
Exactly.
And that's the world I live in at this point. Like I cannot watch rodeo anymore because the handling of the horses and the mouths and all this, just I just can't stomach it at this point. But like, I'm very leery of, I'm not going to ever say that that's abuse. I guess I come at that the same way that you do, in that I want to be the change that I see, and I can take your horse and we can make a few changes, and we can talk about how you use your hands and all of that stuff. And if you read their body language at all, you're going to see that horse in about 10 minutes go, oh, thank God. And he's just going to let down and give the biggest, like,
Absolutely.
the horse is going to tell you you don't have to believe me at all. You just watch him and you're going to see the proof coming right up, so I don't know what the answer to all this is either, but I'm kind of on board with you, and hopefully we can change some minds and some hearts and get people to just look at it a little different way, and the horse winds up the better for it. And so do
we. Everybody asks me what kind of guide I use, and just like you said, the expression of the horse is mine. If he's conflicted, if he's in pain, all you got to do is train yourself to look at that. I tell people at my clinics all the time, you get up with your husband or wife every morning and y'all get ready to go to work together, and y'all dance around each other in the kitchen, or you dance around each other in the bathroom and hardly have any conversation whatsoever. You can have a toothbrush in your mouth and need to go to the sink and not have to say, hey, move. Your husband or wife can look at you and tell. And if we just spend enough time to just notice that much about our horses, their world would be a whole lot different. A whole lot different.
I don't know. I'm kind of out of prepared questions at this point. We've gone a little quicker than I was expecting. Do you have anything that you want to bring up or get into, or do you want to get deeper into? I think we've kind of said what we wanted to say, or what I was wanting to say about the PAST Act and all of that. But
well, and I could talk all afternoon about all the ills of the big lick horse show industry. I can say this: those are not bad people. They're just kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I was there. I needed to make a living. And to make a living, you've got to be competitive. So you've got to do whatever your competition's doing to produce the same thing that your competition's doing, to be in competition. And those, they're not bad people. And that's the biggest reason, one of the biggest reasons that Tammy and I decided to go down the education route and do it one person at the time, one clinic at the time. Because I understand where they're at. You've got a $1 million farm, and you've got kids and you've got bills to pay. And if you just say, hey, I'm not going to do this to the horses anymore, and we're going to go to the horse show and just wind up however we wind up. A lot of those people have got high dollar horses, and they're paying to be in contention for that first place ribbon. And a sound horse is not going to beat a sore horse, because the judge's eyes are trained to look for that different lick. And I understand what those people are up against. And the people from the sound side, some of the activist people call them sadistic, and I mean have said all kind of horrific thing about these people. And Daniel, I'm not that person. I grew up in a home that there was love, and I never realized what we were doing was that completely wrong till I started doing something different. And then I married a girl who had never been around the horse business, and she's like, what in the world are y'all doing to these horses to make them do that? It didn't seem that foreign to me. I live in North Georgia. You can drive down a North Georgia back road and see any number of people that's got 150 to 200 roosters tied out in their backyard. Those roosters are not for eating. That's kind of a way of life for folks, and it's a way of life that's been handed from one generation to the next. And I feel like that it's up to us that know both sides of the coin to be that, to lead that change, to be that change. And I, what I don't want anybody that sees this to think is that I hate those people, or that I feel the way about the people that are in the big league, some of the things that's been said about them. They're good, honest, hardworking people. They've got caught up in this thing, and it's an addiction, and there's a whole lot that goes along with it. But they're not in their heart and in their mind setting out to be what they've been labeled.
Well, one of the other I agree with that. I don't. It's not been my experience in the horse business that it's bad people that are in this business. I'm not gonna. I can think of a couple, but by and large, I really got some of the best people in the world in it.
Absolutely.
I'm always very, very conscious of the difference, however, in animal rights and animal welfare. And just as you had mentioned, a lot of this push that's coming along is by the animal rights community.
Yep.
And I'm extremely mistrustful of that community. I don't I've seen firsthand some of the dirty pool. One of the classes I had in college, we did a deal of it was a dissection of an animal rights video that was dealing with dairy cattle. And what they had was a Holstein cow that was down in a barn, and they're using a skid steer to try to get her up, or she's gonna die. They go down and so forth. And they showed us the editing process of how they darkened everything, and then they show you a little 3-second clip of when the guy hits her with the hot shot, and all of the context is taken away, and it was basically the juxtaposition of, here's the film they made with this scene, and here's the actual 20-minute video that they took all of that from. And I mean, those were worlds apart. They weren't even close. You see the manipulation that's taking place there, and there's no way I'm ever trusting that group. I mean, the PETA very famously had one of their main shelters in Washington, D.C. had a 97% kill rate on the people that are supposed to be out here saving all of the animals. Whenever Hurricane Katrina hit in Louisiana, there were lots and lots of national advertising campaigns by the Humane Society of the United States and PETA and some of these other groups, and they raised $500 million to save the animals of Katrina. And the Louisiana legislature had to pass a law to make them spend at least 10% of it actually on the animals in Louisiana, because all that money actually goes to lobbying efforts and bacon wrapped shrimp lunches and things like that. And most people have no clue the real agendas of those organizations. And they think it's a Sarah McLachlan song and it seems really cool. And yes, I want to save the puppies. But what really happens with the $15 commitment you made there is nothing like what you think happens with the
maybe 1% of it makes it where it's supposed to go, or where you think it's going to go. I had an opportunity 5 years ago. There's a guy that's a filmmaker that's trying to make a film pertinent to the past act in the Big Lick, Tennessee walking horse, and he sent me the script, and I could have probably changed my destiny as far as finances had I been willing to be on board with him with this film, but I just couldn't, and told him I couldn't. First of all, he didn't have the facts straight, and if you're going to talk about a sore Tennessee walking horse, then you need to have all the facts straight. If you're going to point a finger at that many people and say that many people are wrong, and he's tried to get it funded. I've tried my best to discredit him on a lot of different levels, but he got involved with the Mustang too, and he's got this Veterans for Mustangs. They're wanting to go out and take retired or discharged veterans and dart Mustangs, and he's just an opportunist. And people like that jump into into the animal rights thing because they can make a big splash and they can become famous and in a lot of times generate a whole lot of money. And that's been my problem with the whole thing. On another level, I've got a client here right now that I keep horses for, the best hearted woman in the world that writes letters week in and week out about the helicopter roundups and all that stuff with the Mustangs. I don't have a problem per se with what she does, except for she's never been to where the Mustangs are at. The only information she has is pictures she's been shared with or stories that she's been told that may or may not be true. And after you go and you see some of the situations based versus what's been said, a lot of times it's two different things. So,
Yes, sir.
I just don't know what the answer is. And, I just hope there's more folks like me and you that come down the pike that try to educate people and educate them the right way, to where the people and the horses both get a better deal.
Well, that's part of why I like having these longer conversations. If all you have is the emotional argument, you can't keep that steam up for very long. So if you're going to go 2.5 hours, it has to be a pretty level-headed, broken down. Here are the facts. Here's the logic. Here's what makes sense here. And I think that's the way that we have to approach and look at all of this stuff, because that emotional poison pill is pretty hard to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. And, early on when I quit the big leg horse thing, I was gung ho. Let's take those pads and chains away from the horse. And, I did a couple of videos. You would not know it's me unless I pointed out to you that it was me on how they disguise the feet. But what I soon came to realize is everybody that had a seat at the table, whether you were pro Tennessee, big leg Tennessee walking horse, or whether you were anti big leg Tennessee walking horse, the players in the game, not the people behind the players, not the people that are sitting home on their computers just listening to what they're told, but the actual players in the game, they're all making too much money for it to change. Both sides are making money off of it. So, you take years ago, Michael Vick, he was a quarterback here in Atlanta. He got arrested for fighting dogs. And I can't tell you the amount of money that they raised showing pictures. HSUS, or one of the humane groups, sent out a mailer with pictures of the dogs. They were gonna take those dogs that he was fighting, and they were gonna retrain them and bring them back into society. I don't know whether that ever happened or not, but they played on every bleeding heart person that watched that commercial, that wrote them a check. And I'll bet you that the dogs never had anything done with them. And that's what people don't understand. What you see when you there's another guy that's doing the Mustangs, and he does a little podcast every week, or a little interview. And my client here that does the Mustangs, she has shared some of his things, and his attack is against the BLM. I don't know why it's attacking the BLM, because the BLM is just doing what they're told to do by the people in Washington. When you work for one of those government agencies and they hand you a mandate, this is what you're supposed to do. Change the laws. Take some of that money you're raising and change the laws, or adopt a bunch of these animals and take care of them yourself. So anyway,
that could be a whole other conversation. Do you have any idea how much money the BLM spends on Mustangs per head throughout the course of their life?
I don't have a clue. I know that it's pretty extensive.
So the average age, I did a lot of this research a few years ago, and I may not be on the penny anymore, but I did the math and everything myself. The average age of a Mustang is 8. So we put them on this pedestal of this is the holistic way to raise a horse, and they've got the best natural hoof care and all of this. Average age is 8.
Yep.
8, yep. Not 28, 8, yep. Right? And in that average age of 8, somehow the federal government manages, without hoof care, veterinary care, feed, or any of that, the majority of those horses are in holding pens with hay and water.
Yep.
So with just hay and water, we managed to spend $75,000 a head on an average age of 8
Wow.
across those horses.
Wow.
Yeah, we could put those horses at boarding stables and
Yep.
have them fed grain and their hoofs trimmed and veterinary care for less money than what.
Yep.
However, I can't fathom how we spend that much money on what goes on with them.
It's the government. It's the government.
Yep.
It's the government across
Anyway.
the board. So just don't know what the fix to the whole thing is. So,
Yes.
but
Well, hopefully it's education and
well, it is, and
yeah.
the more people that I had a clinic in Colorado 2 weeks ago, and I had a lady come ride in that clinic that has just in the last year gotten out of the big lick, and none of her friends, she was just so every point of the clinic when I made a point about what's going on with the horses, she just broke down and cried. One thing we had early on in the clinic, we talked about the horse's mouth and how the horse's mouth works. And she says, well, my trainer was tying my horse's tongue. And that's not uncommon for him to tie a horse's tongue. She just had so many questions about what was going on in the real world versus the world she came from. And she was kind of blackballed because she came to realize they were still soring the horses. And she asked the question, why are y'all raising all this money to fight this legislation if you're still soring the horses? And her trainer, not in so many words, just asked her to leave the barn and take the horse with her. And all of her friends that she had made in the big lick over the amount of time she'd been in there have unfriended her on social media. None of them will talk to her. None of them will answer a question. And it's just apparent to me that, it's business as usual.
Well, I think that also indicates that the emotional language that gets thrown around and all, like the Charlotte Dujardin thing, I can't bring myself to call that abuse. I don't think it's a good thing that she did, but to me, it doesn't rise to that level. And the same, like you're saying, these are a bunch of good people. Well, if you want to open their eyes and educate them, you can't do that by walking into the room and going, "Look, you abusive assholes! You're being cruel to." Like, that is not how that conversation starts if it's going to be successful. So,
you look up that letter that I wrote to Representative Whitfield in 2014. I never pointed a finger at anybody but myself. I told him I'd have a conversation with him, but I said I'm the one that's done this. I didn't drag anybody else into it. I don't know what made me do that. It was an emotional time for me. And it's been the best thing that ever happened to me. I just had hoped that they would see the writing on the wall and maybe retrain the way they look at those horses and judge those horses. They've got the most marketable item out there. The Tennessee walking horses make the best trail horses, and like you and I discussed earlier, 70% of the people, 60 to 70% of the people in the horse business are trail riders. The trail riders are the ones that sustain the horse industry. It ain't the show horse industry. Show horse people don't own a small farm and go to the local feed store and buy a ton of feed and go to the local car lot and buy a pickup truck that'll pull a horse trailer and go down to the local horse trailer lot and buy a horse trailer. Trail riders do that. And they're the ones that sustain the horse industry. And the Tennessee walking horses got, in my estimation, probably one of the two best pleasure horses there are in the entire world. They could make more money and make that breed a whole lot more prestigious if they would go at it from that angle and highlight that flat shod horse that's really talented.
So that is something I meant to say earlier. We have kind of talked a whole lot about the big lick, but the reality is you can show these horses without being training involved in that, right? Like there's kind of
Absolutely.
a fork in
Absolutely.
the road here where we've got the flat shod classes and stuff. Would you mind explaining that a little bit?
Well, I mean, those horses in those classes are not, some of them have somewhat of an animated gait, but it's supposed to exhibit more of a natural look, more of a natural movement of the Tennessee walking horse without the flamboyant animation that they have in the front end. And there's different levels of that. I mean, they got a part pleasure division. The shoe they wear in the part pleasure division is a half-inch thick and an inch and a half wide. Then they've got a plantation division. The shoe is a half-inch thick and an inch wide. And then they've got other divisions all the way down to the trail pleasure in the all-day pleasure class where they wear just a factory stamped keg shoe. There's something in the flat shod division for everything. So if you raise that colt, that's the Michael Jordan of Tennessee walking horses that just can go out there and excel and just has the conformation and the attitude and the muscling to give you a little bit more performance, then do that part pleasure class with him. But if you raise that horse that's like the average that most everybody that's in the breeding business, no matter what horse discipline you're in, we all that raise them raise just average horses. Those great horses don't come along very often. There's a division for all of those, and there's a way to train all of those where they can be competitive within that division. Heck, just 2 weeks ago, the Tennessee Walking Horse Breeders and Exhibitors Association had the World Versatility Show. So they had classical dressage, Western dressage, reining, Western riding, stock seat, barrel racing, all the way down to an obstacle class. And in one of those classes, they do I forget what they call it, the class. It's a horse that's a using horse. They do a pattern class, they do a sport class, and then they do a rail class. And they're judged on all three, and then the score is averaged, and the horse that comes out with the most score wins. And then they've got a division called the maiden division, which is for young horses. Heck, they had 3 divisions in that maiden division, and these horses wear nothing but a like a factory stamped keg shoe. They exhibit the gait without all the animation, but just a using type horse. And I think the prize money in that division's $50,000 or $60,000. So there is a level of being able to compete with these horses without having to think that you have that sore horse. And on top of that, there's other associations. That versatility show was sponsored by the Breeders Association, but you got the National Walking Horse Association, which is a flat shod, keg shod only association that shows all breeds of gaited horses. FOSH, which is Friends of Sound Horses. FOSH even has an inspection process and a group of inspectors, and they license judges from being able to judge Tennessee walking horses right on down to the Spanish breed. So there's a level for everybody. It's the big lick's not the only thing that those horses can do.
So what you're saying is, if these animal groups really wanted to make an impact here, maybe the best thing they could do is sponsor a horse show, put like $2 million into that thing with lots of prize money, and exhibit these horses without that big lick aspect, and just make it the more profitable thing to do. And they wouldn't have to spend $500 million lobbying Congress for $5 million. They could get all of that they purport to want to get done through this mechanism, right?
That, to me, that would be the best way to do it. But for them to spend that $2 million, they're not going to be able to use that horse to raise that $500 million that they could spend.
Yes, sir.
You understand what I'm saying?
What's the motivation? Yeah.
Yeah. All of these groups are based pretty much in DC. And like I said earlier, you don't go to DC for a solution. You go to DC for appropriations.
Yes, sir. Yeah. the biggest exploiters of animals on the planet, right there.
Yep. Yep.
Well, Carl, I don't know. I think we have chewed a whole lot of ground here. I really, really appreciated the conversation with you. I hope we get to ride together at some point down the road. I appreciate you validating my feelings that bringing things like lateral flexion and all of this cantering, for crying out loud, isn't harmful to these horses, that they should be able to do all of it. I had a customer that had one that do flying changes and all that kind of stuff. Really a pretty advanced horse, and he could still gait too, and it didn't seem to hurt him at all. So,
Well, my personal horse, I'm on that journey of being in a 2 rein, and it's a journey to be on, and that's a journey of self discovery if I've ever been on one. Teaching that horse how to move out of the bosel into the snaffle and into that, and it's been enlightening.
Yes, sir. If you try to use that spade bit the same way a lot of the walking horse guys do, you'll flip one over. That's not going to go well at all, right? So.
Well, that's the artistry about the thing. After you get the horse finished to that point, the spade bit's just for a decoration. You don't even use the darn thing. And that that's part of the journey, but that's a partnership. You don't, that's like being married to your wife. You don't, the first year you married, you think you love your wife. But it takes 10 or 12 or 15 years down the road to really discover how much you love her. And that's kind of the same journey you're on with that horse in the 2 rein.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. So, well, I have no doubt we're going to run into one another somewhere down the road, but if I can do anything to help you on this noble journey of yours, please don't hesitate to reach out. I really thank you for coming on the podcast and having this discussion with me. And folks will have links to all of his social media and website and everything. If you're in the gaited horse world and you're looking for a better way, here's one for sure.
Yep. So, absolutely.
Right. Well, do you feel good about that? Is there anything else that you'd like to get
I feel
into?
pretty good. I feel pretty good, because what you don't know about me is, well, you do know it about me. I pretty much am a straight shooter, and I shoot straight from the hip. I don't pull any punches, and I don't try to sugarcoat anything. Sometimes I can get a little bit long-winded, but sometimes you have to be that way to make your point. And
I thought you handled yourself very well, very articulately, and like I said, I think the only way to approach this is kind of with the dispassionate argument. If you're yelling, screaming, foaming at the mouth, and nobody's going to listen to that or believe you, or you have to have the logical case made. So I think that's the perfect approach.
In the gaited horses across the board, the gaited world needs a different level of education. That's the reason that you reached out to me. You realized that I was, based on those pictures you saw in the comment that I made, you realized I was on a different journey. And it's going to take that. If I could get everybody that sells these horses, if I could get everybody on the same page to learn some anatomy and learn how to balance one of these horses correctly, because balance is balance, there wouldn't be enough good horses to go around. So, and it's that way. It's that way in every discipline. I mean, you run across the same thing in what you do. If everybody would put their best foot forward and try to figure this thing out, people would be running to you trying to buy horses from you if the people would just figure it out. So,
yeah, that's the part of it that scares me is how depressed the horse market is overall.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I do bring slaughter up. I know that's a hot potato nobody wants to touch, but since slaughter ended, we are 40% of the U.S. horse population has disappeared.
Yeah.
We've gone from 10.2 million horses to 6.2 million horses in 17 years.
Yeah.
And I'm really fearful of whether we're going to have this industry in 15 years at all at this point in time. And if we don't get this self-regulation stuff down, I'm so.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you. It really has. So thank you
Well,
very
I
much.
appreciate the opportunity. We'll talk soon.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dauphin.